Hello, and welcome to Transmission X. I'm your host, Nate Allen. The date, February 18th, 2024. This is the 9th transmission. A transmission is a signal sent from one person or place to another. It is my hope that this signal provide you a beacon so that you may find what it is that was meant to find you. You have reached this frequency. It is not an error. Stay tuned, but most importantly, be ready. Today, what I must impress upon you is that after doing further reading and research, Project Monarch, mind control, and possession cases are on the rise, as well as known cases of targeted individuals. That being said, when you research, you will find that the majority of information that is actually official is still classified under the auspice of national security. What does that tell you? Well, it tells me that they would not be secure if the information got out. But that also tells me that we are not secure now. The book written by Cisco Wheeler, a targeted individual herself, and Fritz Springmeier called How the Illuminati Create an Undetectable, Total Mind-Controlled Slave was a very revealing read, and I highly recommend it. You can find it for free on archive.org as well as on abebooks.com. Cisco Wheeler, like Kathy O'Brien, was sexually abused under Project Monarch, and her story too involves Jesuits and so-called elites and Illuminati. In the book, Springmeier mentions a place called Suitland Annex that is located deep underground Washington, D.C. There are many of these such locations with tunnels and blast-proof doors. They are more commonly known today as DUMBs, or deep underground military bases. Now, if you'd like to learn more about such locations, I recommend reading or looking up Phil Schneider. Arthur Berkeley wrote a book on Phil entitled Philip Schneider. It's a very quick read, and it gets into some very strange territory, but that does seem to be par for this course. Please research every witness account and every claim made moving forward for yourself, but ask yourself, if they have these deep underground military bases spread out all throughout the country, possibly all throughout the world, and these rich billionaires and probably trillionaires are purchasing and equipping underground bunkers, why would that be? We'll get into that on another transmission, but I had to state that because if they are so worried about information getting out and national security, well, they seem to be secure enough while we are out here on the surface. And that brings a whole new meaning to the term deep state. The CIA, the secret orders, the Jesuits, the Zionists, the globalists, etc., etc. Remember, they are masters of the spin. And like I've said before, we only get what they give us. It is up to us to sift through the dirt to find the gems. Pray for discernment, but never underestimate them or the extent at which they will stretch a lie. That being said, I hope you all completely go all in and never cease searching for the truth. I have come across some very interesting material, and this week I think you'll find out during this transmission that the swamp, as they say, is very deep and wide. It is much bigger than just Project Monarch, but learning the extent at which they will go, focusing on individuals, should give you a handle on things when I go over just how subversive and just how far they will go to control you as well. And before I forget, this recording, this transmission, does get into adult material. Listener discretion is advised. According to Cisco, Project Monarch is something you are born into and was not created by the CIA, but has been going on for centuries in practice. The tenets of the abuse are the same. The abuse must begin in early childhood, using trauma to get children to dissociate. Ever since Candy Jones let the cat out of the bag, the very cult-like, sadistic program of Project Monarch has had to take extra precaution. But it seems that they do that in the light of day. Being masters of the spin, the rulers create councils and boards and regulatory agencies and 501c3s that serve as covers, used every day, in every town, everywhere in the world. You may have heard of the term false memory syndrome or satanic panic. Words and theories are used to spin actual truth as well. Nazi Joseph Goebbels once said, "Repeat a lie enough, and it becomes the truth." That is the very premise of propaganda. That is how they use psychology against you. It is the brave souls that speak out, the crazy stories that hit the ears and airwaves and strike chords in the hearts of man, where we can find the diamonds in the dirt. The truth has a way of setting not only the one telling it free, but also the one listening. Yes, it makes you free as well. Let's meet a couple more brave women today that told their truth before I show you what may be Project Monarch 2.0 occurring today. Our first targeted individual is Kathleen Sullivan. Kathleen Sullivan was born in Reading, Pennsylvania in 1955. Her family seemed like a normal family on the outside, but in her book Unshackled, Kathleen tells a story so horrific, it's not easy to listen to, and it's not easy at all to believe. She states that her memories flooded back while an adult, but because of the use of trauma-based mind control and having many, many alters, it took a while to put the pieces back together. Remember from previous transmissions, alters means personalities, and they are built by the child's mind to help children deal with extreme trauma, or at least that is what is thought that they are. Personally, it is my opinion that sometimes some alters or personalities are ways that demonic entities get to hitch a ride in the mind of an individual, and that is why the abusers use satanic ritual as the modality and the setting for a good amount of the abuse. Moving forward, Kathleen states she was in meetings with CIA psychiatrists as early as 2 years old. The shattering and molding of her mind and new pieces of her psyche began early and seemed to be happening constantly throughout her life. Her dad was a part of many secret orders, but his connections to his satanic cult, the Nazis, and the CIA would be the basis for most of her conditioning, and with whom her programming would take place with as a child. Kathleen even states that her dad would use his member in place of her mom's breast while Kathleen was breastfeeding as a baby. And I'll stop from going into any more further sick detail, but I had to let you know just the extent of her abuse, of how bad it actually was. Kathleen went to a regular school, as I learned the majority of these children victims do, and most of her torture, abuse, and programming would start Friday nights at satanic meetings and would last throughout the weekend. Her book, Unshackled, goes into great detail, but the point here is to show a pattern, an integration, a pattern of regular life, abuse, regular life, abuse. And if it happens your whole life, everyone wants to make these people seem crazy. But if it happened from infancy, do you think you would know the difference? Through extreme pain and child trauma and zero love, the programmers create a mental environment so intense for the child that the child must dissociate from reality itself. Once that is complete, an altar is then created, and from there the programming and complete control of that altar is the final step. And her many altars going into adult years, she claims, are trained to assassinate be snipers, kill by the use of specific weapons and means, completely block out pain, perform sexual tasks, train and abuse other Monarch subjects, and so forth. Kathleen would have many, many alters, each used for specific purposes, and Kathleen was never aware of their activities or deeds committed once she was back to her fully conscious self. If what these victims are stating is true, how many people out there continue this way of rearing and raising their children? How generational is this curse? How big is this cult? If we have record of this happening since the 40s, how long and to whom was this possibly happening to prior? From Kathleen's recollection, her mother was raised the same way. Her dad was raised the same way. Even her grandpa was in on it. A literal generational curse. If this is the case, look around society today. Who keeps it in the family? What people seem to have arranged marriages and arranged relationships. We'll get into that here in a bit, but Kathleen and her story provides us a detailed view where Kathleen names abuses by members of the Golden Dawn, the CIA, which goes by many names. Some the family, the company, the agency, the organization. She also details her abuses by Nazis. Kathleen was made to kill animals while having to endure bestiality during rituals. She describes her programming by her many psychiatrists, and she explains very specifically the methods and thoughts behind this madness. A Nazi, one of her doctors, went by the name of Dr. Black. He programmed into her the importance of continuing their belief system and would force her to recite German phrases over and over and over. He used sexual abuse as the trauma method to create his alters for her. A one Dr. J would torment her by way of giving her hallucinogens, MK Ultra, in an all-white room, dressing in drag. Sound familiar? Wearing adult-sized cat costumes. Cat costumes, remember that later. Kitten programming. It's the beta programming. And this doctor even once wearing a giant white rabbit costume. Alice in Wonderland. He would speak in nonsensical patterns as to elicit fear in Kathleen, and he would tell her to follow the white rabbit and go down into the rabbit hole. He'd even force her to watch him kill a real white rabbit in the all-white room by slamming the rabbit against the wall. Imagine that scene. The phrases that didn't make sense as a child were used as triggers later in Kathleen's life. Anytime one of her handlers would say, I'm late, like the white rabbit in Alice in Wonderland, Kathleen would immediately go into a trance-like state, and whoever her handler was had her under their complete and utter control. The obvious Alice in Wonderland programming was not the only movie stimulus Kathleen had to endure. She states that the programming used on her the most was based around The Wizard of Oz. Keep in mind, each programming had its own alters, with their own roles. Each alter had their own identity, and was used for different purposes by different handlers. Her dad would be the one to hypnotically imprint the distinct personalities of the Cowardly Lion, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man into Kathleen by way of extreme torture, using extreme pain as the catalyst. While she was the Scarecrow, she believed she had no brain, and the byproduct of that was that particular alter, that state, was completely obedient and suggestible. The Cowardly Lion, however, it was used to compartmentalize her fear and would serve useful when used as an op or CIA asset. Her fear needed to be removed, so the lion was then afraid, not Kathleen. But the one Kathleen says they prized the most was the Tin Man alter. This male alter was programmed specifically for assassinations in Kathleen's adult years. Her Wizard of Oz alter states were conditioned to believe that D.C., the District of Columbia, was Emerald City. The phrase, over the rainbow, was used to mentally transport her from her normal life to the Ops world or Oz, using the symbolic rainbow, bridging this world and that world. In the movie, Dorothy is told to click her heels together and say, "There's no place like home. There's no place like home." And back to Kansas or reality she goes. When a handler would drop Kathleen off at home, they would recite and chant the same words or spell. When they would do this, Kathleen would only recall being dropped off by a coworker. She would have no recollection of anything she did prior. And her story only gets stranger. Again, I urge you to read Unshackled, as it reveals her exact role's actions, and later in life, vivid details, and her eventual escape. I do want to mention a couple more things I found of extreme importance in Kathleen's book. She recounted to Daniel Ryder, one of her very first authors. She told her about CIA programming, several code names, and several systems of alter states. She told him this in 1991. They were later mentioned and confirmed by a Dr. D. Corridon Hammond, a psychiatrist at a professional conference in the summer of 1992. She described to Dr. Daniel Ryder the Greek alphabet coded system of programming. Just as she had described in 91, Dr. Hammond described in 92 from many accounts of mind control survivors, from their therapists. So this was corroborated. The states were alpha, beta, delta, and theta. Interestingly enough, these are also how scientists measure brainwaves. It is thought that we maintain a progression of these frequencies through life, but just as evil corrupts natural order, so does it use a system to corrupt those poor subjects' minds. She explains how the alpha state was used to compartmentalize her memories from their primary traumas. These were created first. These alters in this state, in the alpha state, would create a core chain programming and would use trauma and hypnosis to store information by specific individuals that could be accessed in the future by only those individuals. This has made it so no paper trail was ever necessary, no loose ends. In a previous transmission, I also mentioned that the Monarch programming Kathy O'Brien endured was used for her to have photographic memory for her owners and handlers for very similar purposes in very similar ways. Kathleen's beta programming, that is the sexually conditioned programming. It was trained into her, and the book states that some programmers referred to them as Barbie parts. Beta programming has also been known to be cat or kitten programming, using cat ears and kittens as the symbol. Handlers would access her beta programming to have her sexually serve politicians so that they could use that as blackmail when she was a child, and as an adult her beta programming was used to sexually service and blackmail both men and women alike. Her delta programming, those alters, those states, were trained for covert ops like assassinations and even training future victims. Her theta alters were supposedly used in more psychic operations, such as what is called remote viewing. What I found most interesting and intriguing about her story is that by all accounts, from Kathleen, she somehow had a regular life outside of her being a Project Monarch mind control slave. She was used, abused, and then dropped off like nothing happened, just like saying, "Now back to your regular scheduled programming." Just imagine, what has it become today? How far more advanced are these techniques? We may get to see that later in the transmission. But first, this occurred well into and throughout the majority of Kathleen's adult life. It's unbelievable. It's difficult to even imagine. But our next victim, even though they never knew one another, has another story that somehow is eerily similar, and it must be told. But I'll let her tell it. Her name is Bryce Taylor, and you'll hear her and one of my heroes, previous FBI agent and FBI and CIA whistleblower, Ted Gunderson. Without further ado, here is Bryce Taylor's story. Give it a listen.
Until 1985, really, I thought I was living a perfect life. I thought I had a perfect childhood. I thought I had, perfect parents and family, and that my family that I married was perfect. It couldn't have been farther from the truth. My multiple personality condition resulted from what I had first thought in 1986 was solely sexual and ritual abuse. But as I began to remember and heal more of my hidden past, I realized that ritual abuse was merely the mind control, trauma base my pedophile father and others used to condition me for participation in Project Monarch, the Central Intelligence Agency's white slavery operation. Mind control sex slaves are created by starting with a child from birth and inducing trauma, which for me was done in the form of being sexually abused and then being satanically abused within a church, and then also at home where I was put through a trial of satanic rituals, which means there were blood rituals done where I was forced to witness animals and people being sacrificed. And then things such as in the church, I was sexually abused by the minister there. And a lot of it was a cover for pornography and then child prostitution that looked like I was going to choir practice, but once the doors were closed to the area where we did that, we were taken down in the basement, and it turned into kiddie porn where we were being filmed.
I was an FBI agent for 27 and a half years. At the time of my retirement, I was the senior special agent in charge of the FBI Los Angeles Division. I have been qualified in the courts as an expert on cults and satanic ritual abuse. I'd have to say that Bryce Taylor's story has been confirmed over and over again through my various sources. I also have contacts on the inside of the U.S. intelligence community. I have information from various sources that judges, law enforcement, prosecutors, attorneys, doctors, and many, many prominent individuals, including actors, actresses, professional football and baseball players, are involved in these type activities.
After I fled from California, I began having vivid, detailed memories of being used as a sex slave to some of our nation's highest level government officials. Among them were John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Nelson Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and top entertainment professionals such as my owner, Bob Hope. The truth is that there are slave auctions that very elite people attend to be able to own and buy the best mind control slaves that money can buy. Frank Sinatra was Bob Hope's friend, and he actually was the person that was in charge of me a lot when I was in Las Vegas on assignment. I would be taken there to be prostituted to Elvis or to some of the other entertainers there during the shows. Dean Martin, Bing Crosby, Sammy Davis Jr., and all types of different situations. And I would be taken to different parties where they were at, where then I was prostituted, or they would make some pornography or something. The theme of the pornography filmed by Sylvester Stallone was sex with dolphins, and he was filming a lot of these young girls with the dolphins, and that was actually pornography that was shared with a lot of people later on. They filmed us over years with all sorts of animals. I mean, it was gross. There was a film that was made when Kelly was a very little girl. It was called Mommy and Me, and it was, just incestual themes of all sorts of interfamilial sex. And during the time all this was happening, I was under total mind control, and so was Kelly. We didn't even know this was going on. We were just puppeted like robots to do these things. I know that some of my perpetrators were actually known Satanists, and some of them were not. I know that Sammy Davis Jr. actually painted his little fingernail with red nail polish and was actually part of a satanic group.
If you go back 225 or 30 years ago, you have what we call the Illuminati that was established in 1776. And the goals of the Illuminati, this is all very well documented, are to take over the world. One of the best ways of taking over the world is to control people's minds and to take over a country through the control of the minds. So what's happening in America, and based on my research and my interviews with numerous individuals, is that the powers that be, the higher-ups, the people in the Illuminati are using the satanic cults as a means and as a tool to condition individuals and to make them victims of the mind control, MK Ultra mind control program. There's probably close to 4 million practicing Satanists in the United States alone, based on my intelligence information.
In a series of meetings that took place before Reagan was president, he took me to England, where we had private meetings with the Queen. During those meetings, I overheard them talking about my genetic structure and the bloodline that would house that genetic bloodline. And she was very interested in having Ronald Reagan be the father of that child. They decided that I would be impregnated for later breeding within the royal family. It's an experience that still causes me a lot of pain, and although I was under mind control and wasn't really aware of this for years, consciously, the full ramifications of this, I had thoughts about this baby, and I was depressed, and I was sad, and I wanted him back, and I cried for months afterwards. They kept saying that this would further American diplomatic relations with the UK, and that I was serving my country at the highest levels by making this contribution. But the truth is, it was not my choice, and I didn't make a willing contribution of my own child. And I'm hoping that my child, my son, will know who he is and will wake up. I would just like to tell the Queen of England that whether a person's under mind control or not, that no one has a right to take a child from someone, and that if she didn't know I was under mind control, that I would, understand, but that, I would just appeal to her as a mother and ask for her cooperation in this situation, that I could be at least reunited with my son.
Now that we know the extent at which these monsters will go to control individuals, do you think they would attempt experimentation on the rest of us as well? In the first book I referenced at the beginning of this transmission, How the Illuminati Create an Undetectable Total Mind-Controlled Slave by Cisco Wheeler and Fritz Springmeier, and what you just heard, remember, they mention that over 2 million sleepers are in America. That's 2 million people just waiting. What are these sleepers programmed to do? That book, by the way, was written in 1996, and as Ted stated, there are over 4 million active Satanists. What would Satanist mind control slaves be ready to do if called upon? And this was being planned and completed in the early to mid-90s. Just imagine who's out there 30 years later. We already know about the deception, but can certain symbolism help us identify the victims, as well as watching out for certain behaviors? I think so. Knowing what we know about how these monarch slaves are created, what familiar, famous faces fit the bill? What familiar names check all the boxes? I can think of a few, but one really stuck out to me, and it did because in the story, in the headlines, I saw one word. We know the term handler has come up in our recent history. Very recent, matter of fact, in the past 10 years. Who have they said has a handler? How about Britney Spears? Do a quick search, and you can find that even MSN has an article with the headline, Britney Spears stopped by handlers from doing interviews. Now, this is just one example, but let's dive a little deeper. We know that the Monarch, being the title of the project, obviously has significant meaning, and I've explained it in previous transmissions. Well, does Britney Spears place any significance in any of her album covers or songs or music videos or anything else to Monarch or the butterfly symbolism? Again, just complete a simple search and you will find that she dresses in butterfly costumes, had butterfly tattoos. The symbolism is everywhere. One look at her Instagram account and you can find a young girl drawn holding a monarch over one eye. That is using the Illuminati's all-seeing eye symbolism. And if you're listening to this transmission, I shouldn't even have to say it, but if you are unfamiliar with the Illuminati or that all-seeing eye symbolism, just pull out a dollar bill and look on the back of the dollar bill at the top of the pyramid. Remember Britney's breakdown on Diane Sawyer? How about her reaching out through strange videos on social media posts, the Free Britney campaign? Now, molestation, that's what everyone seems to have in common. All of these women, molestation from parents and satanic activity. Well, it's all there with Britney. In her mom's memoir, Through the Storm, she says that Britney would sacrifice chickens in the backyard. If that isn't strange enough, in 2009, Courtney Love told US Weekly that Britney Spears' dad molested her and went on to say, and I quote, "Imagine the father that molested you owning you for slavery while you're forced to sing songs picked for their sexual content every night." Insane, right? And you can't forget when Britney had that mental break, when she snapped. Was that just a girl rebelling? Maybe. But how about when her breakdown in 2006, she shaved her head? What'd she do when she shaved her head? She wrote 666 on her forehead and kept calling herself the Antichrist. Also, who managed Britney while she was with Disney? None other than Lou Pearlman. If you don't know about him, I'll read a quote from Vanity Fair that was put into the Huffington Post. Lou Pearlman, the hog fat boy band honcho who created NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys and launched the careers of Justin Timberlake and Nick Carter, was a pervy pedophile who preyed on the young men he mentored. Wonder if he preyed on Britney as well. Seems a lot like handlers we have heard from before. The signs, symbols, actions, and circumstances are all there. A YouTube video by Vigilant Citizen entitled Britney Spears, A Life Under Monarch Mind Control will show you all you'll need to see. How about other Hollywood famous faces? You can almost pick any Hollywood child star, and you can see everything you need to see once you know what to look for, especially when looking for beta or Barbie, or sometimes referred to as kitten programming. This is the programming based on the sexual exploitation of the victim. Now you may be asking or thinking, could this have been in the entire family? Remember that Free Britney campaign I mentioned? I mean, you weren't under a rock, I know, but how about her sister? Remember, they hide in plain sight. Britney's sister, Jamie Lynn Spears. They attempted a path to stardom for her as well. Who was her manager? Well, it was well-known pedophile Dan Schneider of Nickelodeon. And just to drive the point home, let's showcase one more famous potential Monarch victim or targeted individual. How about child star Amanda Bynes? Let's just go through the same litmus test, shall we? First, potential handlers. Just like Britney, her dad did have her under conservatorship. The dads seem to take primary ownership and seem to mold the victim in the beginning of their life. Okay, now, does she have any history of sexual abuse? Well, according to her, she had that and much more. I'll read tweets she posted, then deleted. One goes, "My dad fondled himself in front of me so many times that I started recording him on my phone in hopes of catching him." Another states, "My mom knows that my father's literally and physically incestual towards his own daughter, and the fact that she never called the police on him embarrasses me to no end." And yet another one, reads, I cannot hear the sound of his incestually charged voice ever again, and I'm just being honest. But the one I found, no, the two that I found, should stop all questioning or wondering if she was ever a victim of Project Monarch. And they read as follows. I will not be manipulated or brainwashed by anyone anymore. And then, of course, in her mind, to save her handler from scrutiny, she immediately tweets, my dad never did any of those things. The microchip in my brain made me say those things, but he's the one that ordered them to microchip me. How much more MK Ultra Monarch exposing needs to happen after a statement or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 like that? And also, if that wasn't enough, I was able to find a handler. Guess who managed Amanda Bynes? That's right, Dan Pedo Schneider. Folks, look into everyone, especially the child stars, and the connections you will make are unmistakable. Just like the movie They Live, you may be forced to try on those glasses. And don't worry, I didn't forget that in the beginning of this transmission, I mentioned how I'd show you just how they weren't stopping with individual targets. It started back in the 60s. And those scrying screens called televisions, people stared at daily, watched their programming. A network like NBC or CBS, when CBS would sign off, they would play the national anthem, and the words of the song would be shown in a banner under the American flag. This would signify the end of the program. Anyway, during this overtly patriotic song, a more covert action was taking place, and the audience, the American people, were completely unaware. Subliminal messages were spliced into the words too fast for the human eye to see. They read just like the banner from the movie They Live, and if you've never seen it, it's a John Carpenter movie. It's fantastic. Let me just tell you a few of the slogans or a few of the commands that were given in this subliminal mass programming. They read, do not question the government. Another one read, buy Naomi, buy Ultra, worship, consume, believe, obey. Another one said, trust the U.S. government. And another read, God is real, God is watching. I wonder which God they were referencing. In any event, another one said, obey, consume, obey, consume. Another one said, rebellion will not be tolerated. And one gave it all away, and it read, believe in government God. Oh, there it is. That's the God they're referring to. You can't make this up, folks, and there is much more. You know that Ultra, you know what that means, but I haven't told you about Naomi, or even the more important, Project Mockingbird. As I leave Project Monarch for the time being, I urge you to do your own research, as there is so much more. Look into the 808 frequency, and look into Taylor Swift. You know what? I may have to focus on that next transmission, I'm not sure yet. But there is a lot there, and I even had someone reach out to me about their story with the Swiftie cult. I'm leaving Project Monarch and MK Ultra for now. But now that you have the glasses on, you can't take them off. So be cognizant of what you put into your mind. Stay tuned for the next transmission, and as always, be ready.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
They Live is partially a political statement. It's partially a tract on the world that we live in today. And as a matter of fact, right now, it's even more true than it was then. We are manipulated by a lot of media around us. We are consumed by consumerism. And as you can see, the recent events in this country, they are still among us. They do live, indeed.